But I'm a person and I feel like, people will like you for who you are if you are true to yourself. And music, stop scrolling because what you're about to hear sounds fake. It sounds scripted. It sounds like something written for a Hollywood sports movie, but it happened live on a professional tennis court. A billionaire sheik walked onto the court and offered $10 million for Alexandra Eala's used racket. And her 5-second response left the entire stadium in stunned silence. Not a sponsorship, not a contract, not an endorsement. Music, $10 million cash value for the exact racket, still music. In her hand, dripping with sweat from the biggest win of her career. And what she did next, it didn't just shock the billionaire, it shook the entire sports world. But before we get to her answer, you need to understand the pressure, the atmosphere, and the impossible weight of that moment. Because context changes everything. The desert sun was blazing. Heat rising off the hard court in visible waves. The crowd had just witnessed something special. Ella wasn't just playing well. She was unstoppable. Her forehand cracked like thunder. Her movement felt supernatural. Every point she won felt heavier than the last. This wasn't just another tournament match. This was the kind of performance that shifts careers. Match point came fast. A brutal rally, 15 shots, 20. Then she stepped inside the baseline and ripped a forehand down the line that painted the edge like it was guided by fate. Winner game set. The stadium exploded, flags waving, phones recording, commentators shouting. She walked to the net, shook hands, lifted her racket briefly to acknowledge the crowd. Muscles shaking, heart racing, adrenaline still pumping. She had just delivered the type of performance that makes headlines. But the headline that was coming, no one could have predicted it because in the VIP section, something else was happening. A man wasn't watching the scoreboard. Music. He wasn't reacting to winners. He was watching his daughter, Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid, oil empire magnate, real estate titan, estimated net worth north of $50 billion. A man who could buy almost anything on earth without blinking. Private islands, mega yachts, entire city blocks. But that afternoon, he wasn't thinking like a businessman. He was thinking like a father. His daughter, Aisha, stood pressed against the glass. Eyes wide, hands clasped, tears foaming. To the world, she is Aries royalty. But in that moment, she was just a young girl who had been fighting her own private battles. Reports later would reveal she had faced serious health struggles in recent months. Long hospital days, uncertainty, fear, and through all of it, she found strength in one thing. Watching Alexandra Eala refuse to quit. Every comeback, music, every scream of determination, every point fought like survival. Ella became more than an athlete to her. She became proof that resilience is real, that fighting matters, that pain doesn't win. So when that final forehand landed and victory was sealed, Aisha didn't just clap. She turned to her father and whispered something simple. I wish I could have that racket. Most fathers would arrange a meet and greet. Maybe an autograph, maybe a framed jersey, but Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid does not operate in maybe. He operates in magnitude. The match ended. A walk toward her bench, wiping sweat from her face, probably thinking about ice baths. Recovery the next round. Then the energy shifted. Security personnel near the court entrance suddenly moved aside. Tournament officials exchanged nervous glances. A ripple of confusion spread through the front rows. And then he stepped onto the court. Composed, certain, dressed in immaculate white traditional robes, flanked by security, who looked unsure whether to stop him or escort him. Music. The noise began to fade. People noticed something unusual was unfolding. Music. He walked directly toward the umpire's chair and gestured for the microphone. The umpire hesitated, then handed it over. The stadium speakers crackled. Silence swallowed the arena. I am a father. His deep voice echoed across the court. Not arrogant, not aggressive, emotional. Ella froze near the baseline, racket still in her hand, unsure whether this was a ceremony, a breach, or something entirely unprecedented. The sheik continued. My daughter has been inspired by you during her hardest days. Today is her birthday. Cameras zoomed instantly to the VIP suite. Aisha stood there visibly shaking. The sheik turned back to Ella, locked eyes with her. Music. Alexandra Eala, I would like to offer you $10 million US for the racket you used to win this match. The sound that followed wasn't a scream. It wasn't applause. It was a collective gasp. The kind that empties lungs all at once. $10 million. for graphite and strings for a racket that costs a few hundred at retail. But this wasn't about materials. It was about meaning. It is not just an item, the Sheikh said, voice tightening. It is a symbol of hope. The cameras zoomed in on Ella's face. Sweat along her hairline, eyes steady, processing. The crowd held its breath. Commentators stopped mid-sentence. On social media, clips were already uploading before she had even responded. For seconds passed. 5. And here's what made those 5 seconds unbearable. $10 million changes everything. Music, it builds, secures families, funds charities, transforms generations. In Philippine pesos, it becomes a life-altering, history-shifting figure. No one would blame her for accepting. In fact, most people would expect her to. But here's what the world forgets about Alexandra Eala. She didn't grow up surrounded by wealth. She fought for every opportunity. She left the Philippines at a young age to train at the prestigious Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain. She lived far from home, sacrificed comfort, endured homesickness, carried the expectations of an entire nation that sees her as a symbol of possibility. She understands money. She understands sacrifice. She understands what $10 million means, which is exactly why the next 5 seconds mattered more than the number itself. The Sheikh stood confidently. In his world, everything has a price. Rare art. Bid higher. Limited edition car. Double the offer. Private island. Outspend the competition. Value increases with scarcity. That is how markets work. But what happens when you encounter something that refuses to enter the marketplace? What happens when inspiration cannot be bought? Ella looked up at the VIP box, saw Aisha's tear-filled eyes, looked down at the racket in her hand, scratches from battle, grip darkened by effort. This wasn't just equipment. It was an extension of her journey. Thousands of practice hours, early mornings, losses, comebacks, pain, growth. The stadium was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of cameras adjusting focus. 5 seconds. That's all it took. And in those 5 seconds, she made a decision that would travel far beyond this court, far beyond this tournament, far beyond $10 million. Because what she was about to say wouldn't just answer a billionaire. It would redefine the meaning of value in modern sports. And trust me, no one in that stadium was ready for her response. The silence was suffocating. $10 million hovered in the air like heat rising from the court. Cameras zoomed so tight you could see the sweat along Alexandra Eala's temple. Commentators stopped mid-sentence. The billionaire stood waiting. His daughter watched with trembling hands pressed against the glass, and the entire stadium leaned forward at the exact same time. 5 seconds. That's all she had. 5 seconds to choose between generational wealth and something she couldn't deposit in a bank. Ella stepped toward the microphone. Music, no agent whispering, no coach signaling, no dramatic pause for effect, just instinct. She adjusted her grip and looked directly at Sheikh Khalid Al-Rashid, then lifted her eyes toward Aisha. When she spoke, her voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. "Sir," she began, the sound carrying through every speaker in the stadium. "Your daughter's love for this game is worth more than any amount of money." The words didn't explode. They landed heavy, meaningful. She continued without hesitation. "I can't sell you this racket, music, because inspiration shouldn't be bought. It should be shared for a heartbeat." No one reacted. It was as if the world needed a second to process what had just happened. $10 million declined, not negotiated, not countered, refused. But she wasn't done. Instead of stepping away, instead of protecting the drama of the moment, she walked toward the baseline directly beneath the VIP section and motioned for Aisha to come down. Security hesitated, protocol battling emotion, but the moment was bigger than rules. The young girl was carefully guided down toward the court, her steps shaky, her expression overwhelmed. Music. When she reached Ella, something subtle but powerful happened. Ella didn't stand tall like a champion towering over a fan. She knelt. "Eye level, music, equal present. This is for you," she said softly, placing the racket into Aisha's trembling hands. "But only if you promise me something." The stadium leaned forward again, hanging on every syllable. "Promise me you'll keep fighting just like I do." Aisha broke. Not polite tears, not composed emotion. She burst into uncontrollable sobs and wrapped her arms around Ella, holding on as if that embrace meant more than anything money could ever buy. Behind, music. Them, The billionaire who commands boardrooms and billion-dollar oil negotiations stood wiping tears from his eyes. The crowd didn't just applaud. It erupted. A standing ovation rolled through the stadium like thunder, echoing off the structure, refusing to stop. People weren't cheering because it was dramatic. They were cheering because they had just witnessed something rare in modern sport. In an era defined by contracts, music endorsements, and price tags, they saw someone choose principle over profit in real time. And that music hit differently because here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people would have taken the money and no one would have blamed them. $10 million changes families, secures futures, builds minds, funds charities, erases financial stress for generations. Accepting it wouldn't have made her greedy. It would have made her human. That's what makes this moment extraordinary. Alexandra Eala understood exactly what she was turning down. She didn't grow up surrounded by oil wealth. She fought for every opportunity. She left the Philippines at a young age to train at the prestigious Rafa Nadal Academy in Spain, sacrificing comfort, battling homesickness, carrying the expectations of an entire nation that sees her as a symbol of possibility. She knows the value of money. She knows the cost of sacrifice, which means this decision wasn't naive. It was intentional. Within minutes, social media exploded. Clips of the hug circulated globally. Hashtags trended across continents. Analysts called it one of the most emotional post-match moments in modern tennis history. Branding experts immediately pointed something out. She may have declined $10 million in cash, but she had just gained something far more powerful. Trust, music, authenticity, integrity. In modern sports, that kind of capital is priceless. Sponsors began reaching out almost instantly, not because she won a match, but because she displayed character under pressure. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened behind the scenes. Sources close to the Al-Rashid family revealed that Sheikh Khaled wasn't offended. He wasn't embarrassed. He was moved deeply. Music, for a man who lives in a world where nearly everything can be acquired with enough zeros. He had just encountered something that refused to be priced. And instead of reacting with ego, he responded with humility. Back in the locker room, reporters crowded Eala, microphones stretching toward her like branches. Why refuse? Did you hesitate? Do you regret it? She simply smiled and said, some things are just for the heart. No speech, no branding statement, no elaborate explanation, just truth. Meanwhile, Aisha left the stadium holding that racket like it was sacred. Witnesses said she refused to let anyone else carry it. Not security, not assistance. She kept it pressed to her chest, music, the entire ride home. And here's the irony that makes this unforgettable. If the billionaire had bought that racket, it would have been expensive memorabilia because it was given freely. It became priceless. But the story didn't end with applause because within 24 hours, the $10 million that had been rejected wouldn't disappear. It would transform. And what Sheikh Khaled decided to do next would turn this emotional exchange into music, something even bigger than a viral moment. The 5 seconds that shocked the world were only the beginning. What happened next is what truly separated the story from a viral sports clip and turned it into something historic. Within 24 hours of that emotional embrace, whispers began circulating through financial circles and tennis insiders. The $10 million that had been offered and refused was not quietly disappearing back into a billionaire's portfolio. It was moving, redirected, multiplied in purpose. Sources close to Sheikh Khaled Al-Rashid revealed that the moment on court had affected him more deeply than anyone realized. He had walked onto that court believing money could solve everything. He walked off understanding that some of the most powerful exchanges require no transaction at all. And so instead of buying a racket, he decided to fund something bigger, far bigger. Reports began surfacing that the same $10 million was being pledged toward youth sports development in the Philippines in honor of Alexandra Eala. Not as a publicity stunt, not as a marketing maneuver, but as a response to what he had witnessed. Character under pressure, compassion without calculation, a reminder that inspiration compounds when it is given freely. Imagine that ripple effect for a moment. Instead of one object sitting in a private collection, music, entire tennis courts could rise from concrete in underserved communities. Instead of one symbolic purchase, thousands of children might receive rackets, coaching, and access to a sport that often feels reserved for the privileged. That is the multiplication of generosity. That is how one music, 5-second decision can echo across generations. Back in the Philippines, excitement erupted. Tennis coaches began discussing the possibility of new facilities. Parents who had once seen the sport as financially unreachable started imagining new doors opening for their children. Social media feeds across Manila filled with clips of Eala kneeling before Aisha. Not because she won a match, but because she chose humanity. And that distinction matters. Because sport has always been about more than score lines. We watch for the rallies. Yes. We celebrate the trophies. Yes. But the moments we remember decades later are the human ones. The unscripted ones. The ones where pressure reveals character instead of cracking it. Think about the message this sent not just to Aisha, but to every young athlete watching. If Sheikh Khaled had successfully bought the racket, the lesson would have been simple. If you have enough money, you can acquire anything. But because Eala refused and then gave freely, the lesson changed. It became this. Your value is not determined by your wealth. Your snorts worth is not measured by what you can purchase. Inspiration is not a commodity. It is a connection. That subtle shift in narrative is powerful. For Aisha, that racket is no longer just equipment. It is proof that she matters. Not because of her father's billions, but because of her own courage and passion. For Sheikh Khaled, it became a mirror moment, a rare experience where immense wealth met something it could not command. And instead of resisting that truth, he embraced it. Those close to him say he spoke privately afterward about being humbled, about realizing that while he can build skyscrapers and negotiate oil futures, he cannot manufacture authenticity. That can only be earned. Meanwhile, Eala returned to the practice court the next day like nothing extraordinary had happened. That detail says everything. She didn't post a dramatic caption. She didn't schedule interviews to relive the moment repeatedly. She trained, focused, prepared for the next round. When asked again about the decision, she simply repeated, "Some things are just for the heart." In a sports era dominated by calculated branding strategies, that kind of simplicity feels almost rebellious. Analysts have since debated whether she made the smart financial decision. But here's the deeper truth. Integrity compounds faster than interest. Since that day, her following has skyrocketed. Brands that value authenticity have reportedly lined up to associate with her image. The WTA community has praised her sportsmanship. Fellow players have quietly admitted they're not sure they would have made the same call, and that honesty only amplifies the weight of what she did, because courage isn't impressive when it's easy. Music, it's impressive when it costs something. And let's not forget the broader symbolism. A Filipina athlete who trained at the Rafa Nadal Academy. Music, who left home to chase a dream in a sport dominated by wealthier nations, stood in front of one of the richest men in the world and calmly redefined value. That image resonates far beyond tennis. It resonates in boardrooms, in classrooms, in living rooms where parents teach children what truly matters. There's also a fascinating psychological dimension here. In high-pressure environments, most people default to financial security. It's survival instinct. Yet, Eala's response was immediate. No visible calculation, no bargaining. That suggests something deeper than impulse. It suggests clarity of identity. When you know who you are, decisions under pressure become simpler. You don't weigh every outcome. You respond in alignment with your values. And that kind of internal certainty is rare. The racket itself has now become symbolic across the Middle East and Southeast Asia. Not because of its material, not because of its brand, but because of the story attached to it. It represents a boundary that money could not cross. It represents a father learning that love sometimes requires humility. Music. It represents a young girl discovering that heroes see her not as a fan, but as a person. Music. And it represents an athlete proving that legacy is built in moments, not contracts. So, here's the real question this story leaves us with. What would you have done? Be honest. $10 million is life-changing. There's no shame in admitting it would be hard to refuse. Most of us would take the check. We have responsibilities, families, dreams that require funding. But that's why this moment feels so powerful, because it shows what happens when someone chooses differently. When someone decides that meaning outweighs money, that connection outweighs currency, that being wealthy and being rich are not the same thing. In the end, Sheikh Khaled tried to buy a symbol. Alexandra Eala gave him and all of us a lesson, a reminder that some things cannot and should not be commodified, that inspiration grows when shared, that the heart understands value in ways the wallet never will. Years from now, people may forget the exact score of that match. They may forget the tournament round, but they will remember the image. A champion kneeling on a hard court, placing a racket into a young girl's hands, and choosing kindness over cash. And that is how a 5-second decision turned $10 million into a legacy.